Hello, everyone. It is Friday, August the 2nd, 2019, and we're starting another live stream of development of Ruma, the Matrix implementation in Rust. This is the second stream in my new series that I started a couple of days ago. And today we're going to be continuing on with where we left off on Wednesday, which was working on merging two Ruma libraries, Ruma API, Ruma API, and Ruma API macros. So we're merging these two libraries into one repository using cargo workspaces. And yeah, that's the premise of what we're doing. You might also have noticed at the start of the stream there, I added in a fancy new little splash screen. I was working a little on that this morning, trying to be slightly more pro in how I'm doing my stream. You can also see I have that super high-tech new little bar at the top with all of the links to where you can find me on social media and GitHub and all of that nonsense. I figure this will also make it easier for people who end up watching this later on YouTube to know where these things are if they're not able to ask questions in real time. So hopefully that's useful. Hopefully that little bar will not block anything important. I kind of tested that earlier, and it looks like I have cut it off just at the top of the text in Vim. So it shouldn't be a problem. We'll see how that goes. Right before I started this stream, I oh by the way, if please always let me know how my audio is doing. If I am too quiet or too loud, I would like to know that so that I don't have to talk into the void and then realize no one can hear me. So yeah, right before the stream started, I was reading This Week in Matrix, which is a weekly newsletter that the Matrix team started doing a while back. And I think that, yeah, every Friday they post this blog, which is kind of a roundup of all of the things that have been happening in the Matrix ecosystem in the past week. And it's quite active, actually. There's never been a week since I've been following it that has had anything less than about this amount of information about what's been updated. So this is all sorts of information about servers and clients and libraries and bridges and all sorts of interesting stuff. And also the Matrix team does a live blog. So if you're interested in more video content about Matrix, this is also a good thing to follow. They do kind of a weekly update as well. I think it's weekly. So that's pretty interesting. I also noticed this time that there is a Kotlin implementation of Matrix called Coma, which I find amusing because this is essentially using the same naming signature that we're using for Ruma, where if it wasn't obvious, Ruma comes from the first two letters of Rust and the first two letters of Matrix, and this is exactly the same thing for Kotlin. So I wonder if that's just coincidence or if they got that idea from Ruma. In any case, I have not used Kotlin. I am really not a Java or Android person at all. I've never used and probably never will use Android. But Kotlin is apparently a pretty cool language for the JVM, and has got a lot of pretty strong fans that are really kind of singing its praises. I've only looked at it very briefly, as I don't really have a particular use for it. But if you are an Android user, you may be interested in checking this out. I noticed that this one actually says desktop. So this apparently is not even Android specific. This looks like a real desktop client for Matrix, which is pretty cool. I'm always really happy to see new Matrix clients, because I hope one day to be able to replace Riot with something that is not using Electron. And as far as I know, none of the non-Electron clients are particularly mature at this point. But it's only a matter of time, because there's several that are under development. So this is cool. If you're interested in Kotlin, definitely check this out. That's if you can't tell, this is github/coma-im. That's the URL. Actually, I should check my stream to see if the URL bar. Oh yeah, the URL bar is visible. It seems to be pretty visible on the stream. So I will not bother to read you URLs. You can see them. Okay, so let's see. Back to Ruma. Back to what we've been doing. Yeah. So at the termination of the last stream, it was brought to my attention by Jonas, one of my my co-authors on Ruma, that you can actually do a git merge between two repositories in order to keep the history of the repository that you're merging in. So if you look at what let's see. Oh, I'm kind of in some sort of state of... I'm gonna just make a sort of work in progress commit for this to save it. If we look at my history, a couple of days ago, let's see, what did I do? Merge pull request from Ruma v110. Huh. Yeah, so the other day I basically did this merge by just copying in the directory of Ruma API macros into the Ruma API directory. But the downside of that is that we then lose all of the Git history of this repository, which is pretty substantial at this point. I would hate to lose all of this information. I mean, obviously it'll still be there on the old repository, but it would be nice to bring that into the new one if it can live on sort of another branch of the history. So Jonas mentioned git subtree, but there isn't a git subtree command. So I think he's talking about a specific type of merging. I have never done this. I was not even aware that this was possible. So let's take a look at the documentation about subtree merging. I thought I could have done this like beforehand, but I figured if I don't know about this, there's probably other people that don't know about this, and hence it will be worth doing some of this this Git stuff on the stream, so that like all of the stream, the whole point of it is for us to sort of share what we're learning with each other. So I learn, you learn. So let's see. I'm gonna make the text a little bit bigger. Hopefully, it'll make it a little easier to read on the stream. But I will also read out loud if I find anything super important. Submodules, blah blah blah. Look, so we don't want to keep a submodule. There are other strategies you can choose. One of them is a subtree merge, and you can use it to deal with the sub-project issue. Here you'll see how to do the same rack embedding as in the last section, but using subtree merges instead. The idea of a subtree merge is that you have two projects, and one of the projects maps to a subdirectory of the other one, and vice versa. When you specify a subtree merge, Git is smart enough to figure out that one is a subtree of the other and merge appropriately. It's pretty amazing. What does it mean by rack? Oh, it's just talking about the Ruby project rack. I was like, what is a rack embedding? That makes sense. Okay. So let's see what they're doing. You first add the rack application to your project. You add it as a remote reference in your own project, and then you check it out into its own branch. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I was working on the master branch, but I think what I'm going to do is create this and do just sort of like a Ruma API macros merge first attempt. So we're just going to put that in its own branch, and let me verify that I did that right. Yep. And then I'm going to reset this hard to origin master. So I'm going to throw away the commits that we did on Wednesday. And let me double check that that is correct. Yep, that's now the most recent commit. And if I look at the other branches, we still have that other commit. It's just saved on another branch. I may or may not actually refer to it. So let's follow this again. So we add a remote for the other repository. Let me look through there. So we're going to do git remote add Ruma API macros, and that's git at github.com/Ruma API macros.git. Okay, and then we do git fetch Ruma API macros. And so now we've got a version of Ruma API macros as a remote here. And then we want to check it out into its own branch. Okay. So let's check that out as git checkout -b Ruma API macros. And then we're going to be tracking Ruma API macros. What's wrong with this? Ruma. Oh, Ruma. What am I typing? Ruma API macros /master. In the chat, someone says you could also do a pure merge of the two repos with allow unrelated histories. Interesting. I think for now I'll just continue following this guide, and if it doesn't do something that seems like what I want, I will look for alternatives. So now we have Ruma API macros checked out. Oh, I should probably remove... Wait, what's under Ruma API macros? So that's from... That leftover directory is from the old branch that we just switched away from, so I don't actually need that. And if I look at this, if I look at README, then sure enough, this is now Ruma API macros that is checked out. So this says, now if you have the root of your rack project in your rack branch and your own project in the master branch, if you check out one and then the other, you can see that they have different project roots. Yes, that is true. You want to pull the rack project into your master project as a subdirectory. You can do that in Git with git read tree. You'll learn more about read tree and its friends in chapter 9, but for now, know that it reads the root tree of one branch into your current staging area and working directory. You just blah, blah, blah. Okay. So if we switch back to master, and then we run git read tree, prefix equals, what is it? Ruma API macros / whoops. And -u Ruma API macros is the name of the branch that we're pulling from. Let's see, what did that do? Oh yeah, sure enough. So that puts new stuff in the Ruma API macros subdirectory. But now, how does that... Let's see, when you commit, it looks like you have all the rack files under that subdirectory, as though you copied them in from a tarball. What gets interesting is that you can fairly easily merge changes from one of the branches to the other. So if the rack project updates, you can pull in upstream changes by switching to that branch and pulling. Then you can merge those changes back into your master branch. You can use git merge -s subtree and it will work fine. But Git will also merge the histories together, which you probably don't want. In this case, I actually do want that. So I'm unclear if I commit at this point, is it going to bring in the... See, this didn't change anything about the history. Let's see, and I actually... Well, let's just commit this for now. So, merge Ruma API macros into Ruma API. Let's see, so what did that... I think that just seems like it did one commit. I didn't actually get the history of the other project. Huh. That is not at all what I wanted. But then this says you can merge those changes back into your master branch. You can use git merge -s subtree, and it will work fine. But Git will also merge the... But I do want that. To pull in the changes and pre-populate the commit messages, use the squash and no commit options with the S subtree strategy. Huh. So that didn't do what I wanted at all. Maybe I wasn't supposed to commit it, but to merge it? Let's try resetting that. And what if I just do that merge command down here? So we've got, let's see, what is it? It's git merge -- squash. No, I don't want to squash. Let me try -s subtree. and the branch is called Ruma API macros. Refusing to merge unrelated histories. Aha. So this seems like what the person in chat was saying about allow unrelated histories. Let me just do a git help merge. See if it mentions, oh yeah, allow unrelated histories. Allow unrelated histories. By default, git merge command refuses to merge histories that do not share a common ancestor. This option can be used to override this safety when merging histories of two projects that started their lives independently. As that is a very rare occasion, no configuration to enable this by default exists and will not be added. But in this case, it's what we want. We actually do want to keep the history. Huh. Okay. So let's try this again, but with the allow unrelated histories. Merge conflict. Someone says in chat says, I want ASMR of you reading man pages. Well, I'm actually quite a fan of ASMR, so I'm honored that you say that to me. I would not expect that my voice would classify. Okay, let's see. What did that do? I'm guessing that it tried to... Yeah, so that put everything in the current directory, which is not what we want. Not at all. What we want is for that to go under a subdirectory. So let me git merge. Let's abort this. Now, so that maybe I can do this prefix thing that puts it at a certain path. Let's see. Can git merge do prefix? This doesn't specify a prefix over here. I'm unclear how this git merge command knows that the prefix from up here should be used here. It has some sort of internal tracking that it knows that? I don't understand. Let me look at git help merge again. And what's the name of that path? Was it called prefix? Yeah, prefix. Is there a prefix here? Huh. No. Hey, Pug. I'm on stream. No woofing. Oh. This is interesting. My dog Carl is very upset that I have not figured this out more quickly. So this is about merge strategies, recursive. Oh, I guess Subtree is considered. This option is a more advanced form of the Subtree strategy, where the strategy makes a guess on how two trees must be shifted to match with each other when merging. Instead, the specified path is prefixed or stripped from the beginning to make the shape. So this is referring to... This is referring to the recursive strategy. Maybe it's recursive by default. Let's say someone's talking in chat. The subtree, if you do a prefix, will create the subtree in a directory. So the subtree command would be git subtree add. And then it would then put the repo into that directory. Huh. Is there so git help subtree? There does not seem to be a git subtree command. Oh no, there is. It just doesn't have... It doesn't have a manual page? Oh yeah, there you go. So maybe this is more what I want. Why does this not have a man page? That's odd. I wonder if it's a relatively new edition. Okay, so So what I want to try here then is git subtree add, and at the prefix Ruma API macros, and then the repository is git at github.com Ruma API macros.git. Does not refer to a commit. So maybe the ref needs to be master. Aha! There we go. So only if you specify a ref does it recognize the first argument as a repository. So let's see, what did that do? Your branch is ahead of origin master by 121 commits. Interesting. So now there's a Ruma API macros subdirectory. But I don't really want to keep, like, does that work the same as a submodule where it kind of has knowledge about... No, not really. Let's see, what does our history look like now? Add Ruma API macros. So it automatically committed that. It's a little hard to tell which history is from which place. Oh, I see. So there's that. You see that on this graph? There's that red vertical line at the very far left edge. And that goes all the way down, probably, yeah, see, to that 3 days ago. This, at the very bottom of my screen is where that history goes back to, that 954 commit. Merge pull request number 23. So I think that is the last commit to Ruma API. And then you can see that whip commit with the git SHA starting with 695. I think that's the last one here. So if I go back to the end, yeah, so 695. So that's the beginning. So right here is where the two unrelated histories get merged together. And so all of this stuff is the entire history of Ruma API macros. Oh, now, unfortunately, this has tags associated with it, too, which I don't actually want. Because you notice these tags, like I mentioned in the last stream, that one of the reasons I kind of didn't want to do this originally was I really like having git tags, which are just the version number. And if you have two crates in the same repository, then you have to disambiguate which crate you're talking about in the tags, because they could have the same version number. So this seems to have brought along the tags from Ruma API macros with it, which is not at all what I want. Let's see, if I do git tag. Yeah, see, so that's really unfortunate. Yeah, I can just delete the tags, that's true. Let's see which tag, because I'm worried that there's going to be two tags for... What did this do? In the case where there was a tag that already existed with that name, did it overwrite them? I'm not sure how you can tell that. So maybe what I'll do is I'm just going to go over to this page on GitHub and just quickly look at what the releases were before I did this merge and see it. So there was at one time an 060 of Ruma API and an 060 of Ruma API macros. So if I do on the new branch, if I do git show 060, what is that? December 3rd, 2018. That sounds like this one. Yeah. So it kept the original one. So the ones I want are the ones that don't match up. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do about back tags for these. Because actually, I guess I kind of do want to keep them. But I just want to rename all the tags so that they have... Oh, I guess I wonder if I can even do that. I kind of want to rename all the tags so that I keep all the tags from both repositories and suffix them with the name of the library is being tagged at that release. Man, that's really unfortunate. It doesn't seem like there's a super easy way. Someone's saying use git show to check the contents of the tag. I think that's the same as, yeah, that's the same as just git space show, which is what I was doing to see which commit it is. Let's see, git tag, is there a way to show, let's see, git tag. Is there a way to show the current SHA of the commit along the lines with, let's say, git help tag. I want to know if there's a way I can display git tag -v format. I'd like to just list all the tags along with the SHA that they're pointing to. And maybe I'll do like a forced retagging with a new name. By the way, there's a siren outside, which I mentioned on Wednesday is going to be a pretty frequent occurrence because I live in a really noisy neighborhood. So I'm curious if anyone can hear that. It seems pretty loud to me, but it's hard to say what will get picked up on the recording. And I'd like to know whether if I talk through the siren, you can still hear what I'm saying, or I should wait until sirens pass to continue talking. So yeah, feedback on that would be appreciated. Let's see. Yeah, so it's loud, but people can hear me. Not ideal. Well, the good news is that I am probably going to be moving at the end of this year. So, and one of the reasons for that is because of exactly that. It's very, very annoying to have sirens every 15 minutes. I'm going to try and find a quieter neighborhood, which will make things better for streaming, as well as just like my life. Well, even if people are watching the stream are not annoyed by it, I am, because when you stop watching the stream, I am still hearing sirens every 15 minutes, every day. Okay, so what I want to see, well, back to what we were doing here. What I wanted to do was, okay, list tags with an optional pattern. Is there something about listing? I want it to list the tags along with their SHA. Got some Git wizards in it. No, so this is already working out really well for me in terms of like people in the chat helping me out with things I don't know. We've got some people here who are clearly more experienced with these parts of Git than I am, so thank you very much. So git tag -l format equals ref name. Do I actually type ref name and object name? Beautiful. That's exactly what I wanted. Okay, so let's go back to Ruma API over here. I'm going to do this in 2 tabs so I can keep, let's run that again. And actually, maybe I should do this in a split. I don't usually use splits that often, but this way I can keep everything on screen at once. That's pretty nice. My terminal is iterm2 in case anyone was wondering. So Command D and Command Shift D will do these splits. I've tried to learn tmux on a few occasions, but since I pretty much only ever work from macOS and iterm has this native integration, I've never really had a strong reason to use tmux because iterm pretty much does what I want already. But one day I may try it again, and maybe one day it'll stick, and I'll always use that for splits and windows and tabs and whatnot. Okay, so I wonder if I really want to do this on stream because it's kind of tedious. I'm not sure I want to make everyone watch me retag everything. I might actually end up doing this off stream, and I'll just because I mean I'm gonna have to force push these tags anyway, so there's really no harm in me continuing to do work and push some new commits up to master or up to GitHub. I mean. So what I'm going to do is just save this in case I forget. Let me just put it in, like, I don't know, a notes file or something. New note, git tag. So thank you very much for that. Probably would have eventually figured that out from reading the man pages, but Except for the folks who apparently think I could do ASMR reading man pages. You probably don't want to listen to me read man pages all day. In any case, I think we're kind of where we wanted at this point, where we now have this Ruma API macros directory as a subdirectory. And I think, you know what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to do, what did I call that other branch? Where did these other branches come? I don't think I need, what is PR12? Those are old. I'm going to get rid of git branch -d PR12 and PR13. That's really old branches that I don't need anymore. I think I can also get rid of Ruma API macros that I just made, because I ended up not needing that. And yes, what is that HTTP branch? I don't remember that. What is git L HTTP? Huh. What is this about? I don't remember this branch at all. I wonder if this was... Oh yeah, so this I must have been working on this when the HTTP crate was first released, because prior to that, I guess... I don't know what we used prior to that. I guess it was just... Oh, before that it was just Hyper. But now we have the HTTP crate that makes some of Hyper's sort of core HTTP types agnostic between HTTP implementations. So this is a really old branch. I can get rid of this too. I have no reason to keep this. It's long since been done. Okay, so what I actually wanted to do here was just look at this one remaining branch. So I'm going to look at Ruma API macros, merge first attempt, and see what did we actually change. I think I'm more or less going to... yeah, I'm more or less going to just kind of redo what we did before. I ended up not doing a huge amount of actual diff to the code on the last stream, because a lot of it was just kind of talking about background of why I'm streaming and what Ruma is and all this sort of stuff. And then just kind of slowly working through cargo workspaces, which I understood conceptually but had never done before, so it took me a little bit to get where I wanted to go. Okay, so let's take a look at the cargo.toml at the top level. I think I want to keep this, and one of the additions... Oh, interesting. Did that not get saved? Oh, I guess it was part of the... I guess what I really want to look at is git show cargo.toml Ruma API macros. I never remember which order to do those in. So the branch name comes first and then the file name. Huh. That's not what I wanted either. It's still just showing me the diff. I wanted to look at what the file looks like in the other branch without switching to the branch. Again, my git foo is apparently not as good as I was hoping. Anyway, I can pretty much just copy this stuff in. This was the important part. So URL and percent encoding are no longer dev dependencies. They are now optional dependencies. And that is along with these two. So let's stick those in. And this is features. And then Ruma API macros show... No, that's not what I wanted. I want... This is what I want. Where is the other cargo.toml? Yeah, this is the other thing I wanted, which is now depending on Ruma API macros itself. Ah, once again, someone's rocking the Git knowledge. Git cat file -p. The branch is called Ruma API macros. Oh god, I've named it such a long name I can't even remember what the name is. Merge first attempt : path to file. Look at that. Thank you so much for the Git help. So yeah, I think I did that as I was expecting to. Oh, I guess QRSTU. I like to alphabetize everything because I'm super anal about pointless things like that. Okay, so this is cool, and I didn't. I think I I had seen this before, but Jonas pointed out that for a dependency, you can list a crates.io version and a path, and what that will do is use the path version when you are building locally, and it's checked out at that path, and when you're compiling something or building from crates.io, it will use the version there. So that's pretty handy. Someone says in the chat, Git is a beast to learn, and I think only 3 people know how it fully works. Yeah, that's probably true. And I bet Linus Torvalds is not even one of those 3 people, even though he's probably the most famous person associated with Git from having originally created it. As far as I know, he kind of stopped working on it as a main thing some number of years ago. So yeah, probably the thing is like all these little things in these little tricks in Git is like even if I were to learn them, and I am learning them now, like this is literally the first time ever I've needed to do these particular things because I've never merged 2 repositories together. So a lot of it comes down to how often do you use a thing, and of course the less often you use it, the less likely you are to remember how to do it. And so I guess like all things, like your mastery of something comes from just the amount of practice you get with it, and that is generally based on how useful it actually is to you. But I'm grateful for people in the chat who do know this stuff better than I do, who are able to kind of pull these particular things out of a hat. Because it's also a little bit difficult to Google for that kind of stuff when it's like, I want to do this very specific thing in this very specific situation. Like sometimes it's hard to translate like the description of what you want into a search term that will give you exactly the right command. And that's one of the times when it's really helpful to be able to like talk to someone, because a human can sort of interpret what you're asking really much easier than a computer can. Okay, so I think we're good there. Oh, right, and we want this workspace down at the bottom too. So this will tell Cargo that we also have a workspace here, and there is a subdirectory of the repository called Ruma API macros. Okay, so I think that's everything we want. Let's update all of the crates that we're using, and then I'm going to run cargo check and just make sure that everything builds correctly. By the way, while I'm waiting for this to build, I should mention that I'm not really sure. I've only done, like I've said, I've only done a couple of streams so far, and I'm not really sure on an ongoing basis to what extent I'm going to try to explain concepts that I've explained before. For example, like matrix is not that well known of a thing, I think, in a certain community of sort of developers and tech enthusiasts, people know what matrix is, but like it doesn't have anywhere near the sort of name recognition that some of its competing sort of technologies do. And I don't really want to explain what matrix is on every single stream, and I don't want to kind of rehash the same things that I've gone over. I noticed this because when I was updating the last stream, or sorry, when I was uploading the last stream to YouTube on Wednesday, I also transferred over the old... Oh, actually, I should probably show you this just in case you were watching on the stream and did not know that these are now being archived on YouTube. But I created this new YouTube channel, which unfortunately just has this giant garbage identifier. I think you need like 100 subscribers or something before you can get a custom URL that's easier to remember. And if that's true, please tell your friends to subscribe. I got an amazing 45 subscribers just after that first stream, so I'm well on my way to being able to do this. Anyway, what I was saying is, a couple of years ago, I did 2 streams on Ruma development, which is why you see this 2016 stream here. And this was on my personal YouTube account, which I've had since like YouTube was born, whenever that was, like 2005-ish or 2006, I don't remember. And it's got, my personal account has a lot of garbage on it that's all kind of miscellaneous, unrelated stuff. And I decided that it made more sense to kind of create a separate account for this and put these all under one banner so people don't have to filter through all of my other interests, like riding my bike and playing Dark Souls and recording all my boss kills. Like, I don't think everyone wants to filter through that. Although if you do like those things, then I guess you can go search out my personal account. So what I did is I unfortunately I didn't have the original recording of this recording from 2 years ago that I saved. So I just used the YouTube download package, which is really cool if you don't know about this. YouTube download. This is a command line tool that you can use to download a YouTube video to a file on your computer, which is really awesome. So I used this to actually download the encoded version of it that was on my personal channel and just re-uploaded it to the new channel, which, like, as a programmer is such a painful thing to have to do because, it's getting re-encoded. So there's some loss of degradation, or there's some degradation of probably video and audio quality, but hopefully not too bad. And again, it's also like, almost 3 years out of date at this point, so it's not a big deal. Anyway, long story short, when I go back to why I brought this up, I noticed that in this old screencast, I also talked about like what Ruma is, what Matrix is, and I talked about the introduction to Matrix documentation that's on Ruma.io, which I've mentioned many, many times. This introduction to Matrix that we wrote, I mentioned that in both of these screencasts. So I was like, I don't want to keep mentioning this every time. So I'm not going to go through the basics every time, but what I do want to encourage is that if there's someone who's watching this live who wants to know any sort of context about what I'm talking about, I am happy to sort of stop what I'm doing and explain those things sort of on demand. I'm just not going to sort of preemptively do it on every single stream because it'll get kind of redundant, especially for the people that end up following, kind of more long-term. Similar to that, I'm not really sure how I want to approach this in terms of the level of familiarity and experience with Rust that I expect viewers to have when watching this stuff. Because, like, similar to Matrix, like, I don't really want to explain all the basics of Rust on the stream every time, and I mostly haven't really done that so far. Because I have a sense that people who come across this stream are going to be more, or coming to it more from the I know a little bit of Rust and want to see someone programming Rust than they are from the Matrix angle of like, I like Matrix and I want to see someone working on something related to Matrix. So I'm guessing that people have at least some basic familiarity with Rust. I do want this to be pretty beginner friendly though. And as such, if there are Rust concepts or things that you see me do that you don't understand, please ask in the Twitch chat and I will be more than happy to explain what I'm doing and go through, any sort of basics that are necessary in explaining that. Because I really want like as many people as possible to be able to understand and get something out of what I'm doing. So I won't preemptively like explain basic Rust concepts most of the time. But it may happen from time to time. Okay, so with all that said, we've now run cargo check. Oh, and I realize now I actually have to write cargo check all in order to run both. Because now we have two crates in the same repository. So I need that -- all to actually run cargo check against both of them. And now so that worked. Let's run also cargo doc open. I think this will document both Ruma API and Ruma API macros, but I am not totally sure if I need a -- all on this. I guess we'll find out. So the other thing I did, besides just literally merging these two on the other stream on Wednesday, was integrating them so Ruma API macros is just a procedural macro that exports a single bang macro or I guess it's an attribute macro. Yeah. So this is let's see, cargo doc -p Ruma API macros. Okay. And let's open that up too. Ruma API macros. So here's Ruma API macros. All it has is this one procedural macro. And what we want to do is, when a feature is turned on for Ruma API, re-export this thing so that higher level libraries can just depend on Ruma API and get the macro alongside that and not have to depend on both of these libraries and keep their versions in sync. So that's one of the things we were doing here. So let me sort of recreate that. And I think, let's see, let me go back to that cat file thing. So I think the way this worked was, it was under source librs. Oh, let me pipe that through less. So what did we change here? Aha, so this is the other thing that was added. This stuff here. We want to stick this into source lib after sort of URL encoded. So what we're doing here is we're saying if the cargo feature, Carfel, good night. Thanks so much for your input and helping out. Have a good night. Yeah, so when this feature with Ruma API macros is enabled, then we're going to re-export the macro, and we're also going to create this hidden module called exports, which will in turn re-export the other crate dependencies that the generated code that Ruma API macros produces refers to. So this thing right here is sort of a dependency for this to work. And I think at this point, the other thing, I'm not going to, yeah, I think for the other, let's just make sure this is all still working. If we cargo check the top level and cargo dock the top level, this should generate it with the default feature. So we can get rid of that. Ah, yep, there we go. So now we have Ruma API being re-exported from Ruma API macros. So the macros crate can essentially be, I guess, like sort of an implementation detail of Ruma API. No one except the Ruma developers needs to worry about the Ruma API macros crate itself. And as we noted on the last screencast, because I have this, let me go back over here, source lib doc hidden, yep. Because I have this doc hidden attribute, this module, which even though it's public, does not appear in the documentation. So it's kind of a hacky way to do what is essentially a private API, but needs to be public because it's going to be accessed across crates. And there's no way for me to say like pub like Ruma API macros. This is sort of what I want, is like saying this is public but only to this other crate, but there's no facility in Rust for doing this. So the best thing you can do is just kind of hide the documentation and say, do not use this unless you are me. Okay, so the other thing we need to redo from the previous stream is we need to look at Ruma API macros source. I think it's under mod. So in this, let's see. So this is the code that generates the expanded code that the macro generates. This two tokens implementation. This will take a token stream and it will create a new token stream that becomes the expanded macro code. So what we want to do here is we want to find all the expansions that refer to, I guess, URL. What were the, so let me go back to, so HTTP, percent encoding, and URL are the three places where we need to refer to these crates via Ruma API exports rather than as a top-level module. So let's see, if I do HTTP, I think I can probably just replace all of these. This might be a quicker way to do it than what I was doing on Wednesday. So I'm going to replace all of these with Ruma API : exports : HTTP. There we go. And if you are curious what I was just doing, how I highlighted all of that stuff, I'm using a Vim plugin called Vim Multiple Cursors, which lets you select multiple things. So if I press Command N, you can see it highlights the current word that my cursor was on, and if I hit Command N again, it highlights the next occurrence of that word. And if then I then hit the C button or the C key to change the current word, and I type foobar, it replaces it in both places. So it's kind of an alternative way of doing sort of multi-search and replace. The reason I do that is because I got used... before I used Vim, I used Sublime Text, which is also a pretty good editor. I would certainly recommend it to anyone who prefers a GUI editor. Sublime Text, in case you haven't heard of it. Oh, yeah, look at that. Did you see the very first thing it talks about is multiple selections? And there's an example of it happening right there on the screen, how he's selecting len multiple times and essentially modifying the same thing in multiple places in the same buffer. So I got used to using that when I was developing with Sublime Text, and sure enough, someone made a Vim plugin for it, which I think is called Vim Multiple Cursors. Is this it? I don't remember it being... I guess this must be it. Oh yeah, lots of stars. You know what I should be doing also? I should be keeping track of things that I talk about. I'm going to put this just in a text file on my desktop, like show notes sort of thing. For the last stream, I created sort of a list of things that I covered in bullet point descriptions, so that people can kind of know what the stuff that I talk about throughout this stream contains. And I had to remember what I talked about at the very end of the stream. So what I should really be doing is just keeping a list of the things other than Ruma that I talk about in the stream, so I can add those to the bullet point list of the show notes. Someone says VS Codium is good too. It's the project that changed my mind that all of Electron was crap. VS Codium. I'm not aware of that. Open source binaries of VS Code? I've never heard of this. Free Libre open source software binaries of VS Code. Why does this exist? Microsoft's VS Code source code is open source, but the product available for download is licensed under not FLOSS, which contains telemetry and tracking. Oh, interesting. So if you want VS Code that is not built by Microsoft and containing whatever sort of privacy violation nonsense they always use, then you can use this. Interesting. Never heard of this. Yeah, VS Code is also very, very popular. I know it even has some pretty good Rust integration, like Rust-Lang RLS. The Rust language server has an official component. Yeah, the RLS is built to work with many IDs and editors. We mostly use VS Code to test the RLS. The easiest way is to use the published extension. So the only sort of officially supported integration for RLS is through VS Code, which I think is both a sign of VS Code's popularity and sort of something that kind of continues to drive people to it, as they're like, well, I want to code in Rust, and this is the editor that has the best support for it. I guess I'll use VS Code, which I think is kind of unfortunate. Let me put this also in the show notes. I guess I should also mention that since I am using Vim and I'm also using RLS, the way I am doing it is... Let's see, let me open up my vimrc. Oh, God. Let's see. .vimrc. Why does it not like that? Edit. .vimrc. There we go. Let's see. Where's the RLS function? So this... Okay. Whoops. GitHub.com. This is the extension you want to use if you want to run RLS in Vim. RLS, by the way, is the language server that gives you sort of fancy IDE sort of integrations with Rust, so you can do things like auto completion and refactoring and go-to definition and all those sorts of fancy things. I don't really use it super heavily, but I figure I might as well have it configured. So I'll put this in the show notes too for anyone who wants to get started with. Oops, I keep doing that with Rust and RLS and Vim. This is what you want to use. Okay, so wow, that was a big tangent. I don't remember where I was going with that. Let's see, where did we leave off? Oh yeah, it's because I was talking about multiple cursors. So let's see, what is the... So we did HTTP. There's also percent encoding. Percent encoding. If I could spell it correctly. So this used to be re-exported by the URL crate, but in URL 2.0, which was released about a week ago, this was removed, so you now have to rely on percent encoding. So we're now re-exporting this from Ruma API's exports module. So I'm going to have to do the same thing here. I guess this is the only place it occurs. So we're going to change this to Ruma API exports. No, percent encoding. And then the last one is URL itself, I guess. So we want to look for any place that starts with : URL. And let's highlight that. Is that the only place? Oh, wow. Okay, so this becomes Ruma API exports URL. Okay. Very good. I guess we'll try testing this again. I felt like I had to change more stuff before. Maybe I just... Oh, you know, the other thing is I don't need these leading colons anymore, because we're now... Let's see, how do I do... That's unfortunately not what I want. Let's see, Ruma API. I don't need... Oh, interesting. I wonder if I need to... Do I need to re-export SERDI? I guess I do. Okay. Let me do Ruma API exports SERDI. And then we will also do pub use SERDI over here. Standard. So I wish I was good enough with VimScript to know how to select double colons that are at the start of one of these paths and not all double colons. I guess I could actually find that by just searching for use space double colon. Yeah. Oh, that's the only one remaining. But there's still some of these. There's impl, so I want to get rid of that too. Anytime there's impl : I want to just change that to impl. Because we don't need any leading colons like that. That's left over from the... Oops, ooh. That's left over from the module system from Rust 2015 edition. You don't need to start anything with double colons anymore, because all paths start with either a crate name or the keyword crate, or self or super or something like that. So we don't need any of this stuff. It's always a fully qualified path starting with the crate name. Okay, I think I've gotten rid of all of those now. So that should be fine. I guess I'll run Rust format. I probably should have done... Actually, let me just do cargo format all over here. Cool. So we've got... This looks about right. Okay, let's try cargo check again. Oh, wait a minute. I was supposed to do cargo check all. No SERDI in external crate. What does that mean? Do I not depend on SERDI here? Oh, interesting. Only SERDI JSON is here. So I actually need... Okay, let's do cargo add Surdy. And puts that at the bottom. Interesting. And this one I actually want to be optional also, I think. Why is Surdy JSON a dependency? What do we use Surdy JSON here for? Oh, just for errors? That's unfortunate. But I guess, yeah, I might revise that later to have the error type be a little more opaque, because that kind of sucks to depend on this stuff just for error conversions. I think that might be a future future change that I want to make. But in any case, oh wait a minute, dev dependencies Surdy. So this was actually already here. I think what I want to do is, I also want to reorder this because as I mentioned, I'm pretty anal about this stuff. So we want to make this optional, and this will be turned on by the Ruma API macros. Surdy. Okay. Let's try that again. Cargo check all. Okay. That time it liked it. Let's document Ruma API again. Okay, looking good. And so we still don't see Ruma API. Let's see, is there any... Oops. Ruma API macros source mod. What? No, source API mod. Let's look for anything else with Surdy. Is there any... Oh, so those are the only references to Surdy. Okay, so I think I'm up to date with all of my imports. And so the last thing we want to do is move the tests. So I think I'm going to move Ruma API macros tests. Yeah, I think I'm going to move the whole directory to the current directory. Did that do what I wanted? Yep. And so now if I look at tests, Ruma API macros, so this I no longer need to import from here, because that will, and I think I don't need that anymore either, because that's now all contained within Ruma API. Because ideally what we want is that you should not have to import any dependencies that this refers to. It should all be pointing to the versions that are hidden inside Ruma API. That's the point of this merge. So let's see, let's run cargo test. Let's see how far we get. Test Ruma API expected identifier found ::. Oh, wonderful. And now we come to the fun part of debugging debugging a procedural macro, because there's no span information there. So I don't know where in the expanded code this actually is coming from. So undoubtedly I did something stupid here. And somewhere there's a : where it's not expected. Oh, wait a minute. Here's some. Surdy JSON is being exposed as well. So I screwed this up. Let's go down here. We're going to expose Surdy JSON. And anytime we see this... Oh, there's quite a few of those. So we're going to replace these with Ruma API exports Surdy JSON. Okay. I don't think that's what it was complaining about, but let's try it anyway. Yeah, same thing. I wish there was a... I'm just going to do a quick sort of scan through... Where's the generated code? See if anything obvious jumps out at me. Oh, Surdy URL encoded. So that needs to be... This needs to be changed too. So this needs to be Ruma API exports Serde URL encoded. And same nonsense here. Yep. And anything else I'm missing? Anything else starting with double colons? Hopefully I've remembered it all at this point. Oh. This shouldn't start with a double colon. Nor should 358. Nor should 401. Oops. Uh-huh. Okay, that all looks right now. So somewhere let's see. Is that gonna... Yeah. Okay. What I think I need to do here is cargo expand test. No test named test. What I want is Ruma API macros. Okay, so what I'm using here is cargo expand. This is a plugin for cargo that is written by David Tolnay, who is the genius who created Serde. I guess he didn't create it, but he's the kind of most significant author of it. What this does is it will essentially run a procedural macro and output the generated code, so you can look at it and try to find where the bugs in your procedural macro code are. Unfortunately, it requires this -z unstable options compiler flag, which means that let me put this in the show notes. Which means that you can only run it on nightly Rust. And actually, let's see, cargo plus nightly install force cargo expand. Let me make sure I have the latest version of it in case it matters, because I haven't used it for quite a while. But yeah, this thing's really helpful when you don't have very good span information about telling you where in the macro the problem is. And it's especially a problem for when you're working on a procedural macro, because you can see in let's see, where's the test? Assuming that the macro did everything it was supposed to do, the only time that you really need span information is like for the user who's using the macro to know that when they provide something here that the macro can't take, the error that the macro generates points to the place in the code that they wrote in the macro declaration that is sort of the original source of that error. But in this case, like the error is actually something in the generated code rather than something that the user input incorrectly. And so I really do need something like this to be able to sort of look through and see where this might be coming from. Oh my goodness. That's a lot of stuff to compile just to have cargo expand. What on earth is it doing? Why does cargo expand depend on all this stuff? I thought it was just a wrapper around cargo rust C. Huh. That is pretty annoying. Okay. Wow, still going? I have no idea why this has so many dependencies and takes so long to compile. That's really annoying. The other unfortunate thing about streaming from the same machine that I'm programming on is that the recording of the stream will use a little bit of my CPU, which will make compiling slower. Which is kind of unfortunate. But I guess that just means I have to talk more. Maybe this will be the time when I do my ASMR man page reading. Bash is an SH-compatible command language interpreter that executes blah blah blah. No, I wouldn't subject you to that. Good lord. This probably wasn't even necessary because I already had a version of it installed. And I was just thinking like, maybe there's been some changes to it that are important. I should get the latest version. But I can't imagine that this was worth it. Anyway, let me keep looking at the code in the meantime. Maybe I'll be able to spot what I'm doing wrong. Oh, here's another double colon that I missed. 386. Wow, I'm missing a lot of them, actually. Any more of you? I think that might be it, finally. Are we done yet? Yay! We're done. Whoops. Let me actually try the test once more, just in case that was the problem, although I can't see why it would be. Yep. Okay. So let's run cargo expand, and we're going to expand it to, I don't know, like temp, I guess? Temp output.rs. Oh, is this... I wonder if I need to probably run this against the nightly compiler. Oh, yeah. I should not do this. I should do cargo... Whoops. Cargo plus nightly. Because cargo expand will only run on nightly because of that unstable compiler option that it needs. Oh my god, so much waiting. Maybe I should switch back to a dynamic language so I don't have to wait for compile times anymore. And then I can just let the users of my software deal with errors at runtime. That seems like a good trade-off. Huh. Someone in chat earlier recommended a book called Git from the Bottom Up as a way of learning some good Git stuff. Let me try that. Git from the bottom up. Ah, this is cool. Yeah, so this seems to be sort of teaching you about like the fundamentals of how Git works under the hood, which I'm actually kind of a fan of explaining Git this way because I think it kind of removes some of the mystery. Let me add this to the show notes also. I did a talk about Git for a chapter of the Technical Writer Professional Society in San Francisco a year or two ago, where I did a presentation that was like explaining Git for non-programmers. So kind of trying to explain it to an audience who does technical writing but are not programmers themselves and are likely to encounter Git as they work with people who are working in software development. And I kind of approached it the same way of like, let's actually explain what these sort of low-level concepts are to sort of demystify what it's actually doing at a higher level. And then once you understand this stuff, understanding that the higher level flows is actually much easier. Okay, wow, it didn't like that at all. It didn't even compile. Did it output to temp? What is private temp? Output.rs. Okay, let's take a look at private temp output.rs. What in the world? So this didn't even... None of that expanded at all. Why did I not get any output? That's not what I expected. See, because if we go back to tests, See, here's pubmob some endpoint right here, and Ruma API gets exported, but this just completely shit itself. So cargo expand is not even working. What the hell? So I have some sort of syntax error somewhere in the macro expansion. What on earth is going on? This is really frustrating. Okay, so we'll open the test and we'll open mod.rs again. Now, 2 tokens. Expected identifier found double colon. Oh my god. I don't know how I'm gonna find this. Because I didn't have this problem the other day. Where is this coming from? I guess maybe what I should do is just look at the diff. What did I actually change? Did I make a typo here somewhere? Oh, look at that. I see 4 colons in a row. That must be it. Yep. So this is supposed to have HTTP in it. How did I do that? Major fail. HTTP : I bet that's it. Let's try testing again. Okay. That was the problem. Cannot find derive macro serialize in this scope. Failed to resolve, could not find response in exports. So do I have exports response? Oh yeah, I screwed that up too. So, oh man, I really screwed up all the places where it's supposed to have HTTP. That's unfortunate. So exports response is supposed to be exports HTTP response. I don't know how I did that. Somehow in my when I was using Vim multiple cursors, I didn't actually type HTTP. So same thing, exports, and that seems to be the only occurrence of that. So this should also be HTTP. What else am I missing? I should have just let that run. Oh, method. This is also supposed to be from HTTP. Just a boneheaded typo. Alright, what else are we complaining about? Yeah, so serialize and deserialize, it seems to want them in scope, which I thought shouldn't be necessary, but maybe it will be. Request is not a member. Oh, okay. So this is the other thing, is that the API of the endpoint trait has actually changed. So if we look at this endpoint trait, I mentioned in the last stream that a major change that we just made recently was to change this, because it used to have, actually let me show it on docs.rs. I'll just briefly show this again, even though I showed it on the last stream. In the last version of Ruma API, the endpoint was had 2 associated types, request and response, and then of course this metadata constant. And what we found was that in Ruma client API, where we're using this endpoint, we were generating a whole bunch of just structs with nothing in them to be the point where this was implemented for, so that we could attach these 2 associated types. And we realized that it actually makes for much nicer nicer code, and also means that you don't have to use the spaceship operator in the implementation of Ruma Client API if we just made this a mapping directly from request to response. Like essentially, there's no reason for this top level type that binds the two together. It can just be a mapping from request to response. So in the new version, you can see that endpoint is actually implemented directly on the request type, and this is going to be a lot nicer, I think, for the downstream libraries that use this. But the macro is not yet updated to take this into account. So that's what this is complaining about when it says type request is not a member of Ruma API endpoint. It's trying to, the old code is trying to do that. Oh, we've got another, wait, could not find method in exports. What did I do again? Exports method. Oh no, I already fixed that. And that was also on the last stream where I was talking about seeing these errors with standard convert infallible related to these try from implementations. That's actually the reason that these errors are showing up, is because the trait implementation doesn't match the signature of the trait anymore. So I think I fixed all of them except for that problem. So let me run that in the background, and then we're going to go to the place where the endpoint is defined. Where is that? Ah, right here. So you see we're generating this struct that's just called endpoint that doesn't have anything in it. We no longer need this. And what we're going to instead do is implement the request type directly. So we can really get rid of this entire thing. Let's see, we have endpoint doc. I guess we don't really need endpoint. Oh no, we still want endpoint doc. Where does endpoint doc? I think we want to combine these two things. Let's just try this for now. Name description.value. And let me format this a little more nicely. Oh, I can't use the trailing comma there. So we no longer have endpoint doc. Actually, maybe I can get rid of... I think I can put this description here. I don't need that first sentence anymore. Let's get rid of this and just start with this. So this is, sorry, this is the Rust documentation for the request type that I'm editing here. Oh my god, we've been raided. Sika Playa. Thank you, Sika Playa, for the raid. Welcome to all of the people that just joined the stream. I don't know what context you have about what I'm doing, but this is a stream where I'm developing a project called Ruma, which is an implementation of the matrix protocol in the Rust programming language. So if you're interested in learning how to write some Rust and seeing how Rust is being used on a real-world project, you are in the right place. And if not, no hard feelings. And thank you, Sika Playa, for the raid. The raider says no clue what this is, but it looked cool. Yeah, so this is mostly about the Rust programming language, which, if you have not heard of, is at rustlang.org, and it's kind of like a sort of modern version of what C++ would be if C++ were to be invented today with all of the things that we've learned in the history of software development ever since. So it's intended for what they call systems programming, which basically means like writing low-level stuff. So you should be able to use Rust in any place where you would use C or C++, but you have a lot of extra guarantees about the safety and correctness of your software that you do not have in C and C++, specifically in relation to memory safety. So like use after free and buffer overflows and all that kind of stuff. A lot of things that are undefined behavior in C are very heavily restricted in Rust and checked for you at compile time. So it's a great programming language. I love it. I've been using it for about 5 years, I guess, which is a pretty long time, actually. And then Ruma, I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, but check out matrix.org for a little bit of detail about what Matrix is. It's sort of like a thing for real-time communications, like chat and video, text chat, video chat, instant messaging, group chat. It's a protocol that lets you do all that stuff with a server and a client that are both open protocols. So you can implement a server yourself, you can implement a client yourself, and you can be interoperable with all of the other servers and clients. The idea is to give people back control of their communications, so you can you can talk with your friends. You're gonna have private communications for personal communication and groups and companies and all of these things without your communication being controlled by a corporation who owns both the network and the software. So things like Slack and Facebook Messenger and all of these things where the company can read everything you say and all of the data lives on their servers. And if you want to use their network for chatting, then you have to use the software that they provide. So Matrix is trying to put put back in the hands of the users the sort of the power and control of data and privacy. And so Ruma is the project I'm working on here, which is an implementation of a Matrix home server and client in Rust. So welcome to the people that just came in on the raid. That's what that's for. And now back to what I was doing. And what was I doing? Yes. So we're on this stream. We're merging two of the libraries that are used in Ruma, called Ruma API and Ruma API macros. Ruma API is this one, which defines just this trait. A trait is like an interface, basically, kind of like a very powerful version of an interface. And this defines sort of what is in the Matrix spec called just an API, I guess. So there's a bunch of APIs in the Matrix spec. They're all JSON exchanged over HTTP. You can click on any one of these and see that we have a request type that has a certain structure and a response type that has a certain structure, and you make a request to a particular URL to get it. So this endpoint trait represents an individual one of these, and for every endpoint, we implement this trait with a unique type, and that's how the client library is generated. And so in Rust, you have a macro system that allows you to generate code at compile time to reduce the amount of boilerplate that people need to write. So there's this separate crate that we have called Ruma API macros, which generates an implementation for one of these given endpoints to conform to this interface definition based on a very sort of simplistic, succinct definition of what is different about that API. So this is an example right here of what the definition of a Ruma API macro call looks like. So we give it some metadata about the request, like a description of what the endpoint is for, what HTTP method it uses, the URL path, whether or not it's rate limited, whether or not you have to be authenticated to use it, and then we define the structure of the request and the response types. And all we have to do is just declare that, and at compile time, it will generate all of this stuff, which is the actual implementation for how that's going to work when it gets plugged into a client. So what I'm doing here on this stream today is merging these two libraries into one so that Ruma API macros becomes an implementation detail of Ruma API, and downstream libraries that are depending on Ruma API don't really need to know anything about how Ruma API macros is implemented. All they need to do is import the macro, which is here re-exported, and just call it. So it should be a much better user experience when we're done here. Right. So what I was doing is updating the generated code to match this new structure. So we no longer have an endpoint type. We do have response types. And I think that actually might be the only thing that was needed. Let's try running cargo test again. Okay, so we're still complaining a little bit. It really doesn't like that I don't have serialize and deserialize in scope, which is pretty frustrating. I thought... Didn't I import those, though, don't I? Let's see. Yeah, I am importing them. Oh. Can't find derive macro. Oh. How do I distinguish from the two? That's interesting. Now, this is kind of confusing because, so Serde has these two traits, serialize and deserialize, but it also exports procedural macros that allow you to derive those two traits for a type. So if we go down to, where's derive? How does derive not appear here? That's weird. Why is it expecting... What in the hell? I'm not even using the derive macros here. Derive doesn't appear in this file at all. Hold on a second. Oh, I am using it. It's in lib. Question, how will I understand as a newbie? It depends what you're referring to. If you're talking about Rust stuff, feel free to ask me any more specific questions about what I'm showing on the screen that you may not understand. If you're talking about just getting started with Rust, Rust actually has really, really good documentation, especially if you're coming from the C and C++ world, where you're a lot of the time sort of on your own for how to learn this stuff. Let's see, how do you get to... Yeah, so on the Rust website, which is rust-lang.org, click on Learn and read the book. This is the best place to get a really good understanding of how Rust works. And if you're talking about Ruma-specific stuff, I will try to explain as best I can as we go. But there is a lot of sort of context here, and as I mentioned earlier, I don't want to spend too much time on each stream kind of re-explaining the same stuff. But if there is someone watching who really would like to better have some more context for what I'm talking about, then that'll be useful. So the question is, what is Ruma API? So let me go to GitHub. If you go to the GitHub organization, GitHub/Ruma, you will find all of the libraries that make up the Ruma project. The repository that's just called Ruma is the home server component of the Matrix implementation. So this is the thing that you connect to when you're chatting, that stores all of your messages, that keeps track of which rooms you're in, and that kind of stuff. This was the ultimate sort of like long-term goal of this project, is to implement this component, but it's very large and complicated. So it's going to take a long time for us to really get it into a usable state. The other part of Ruma as a project is this library, Ruma Client. And this is just a general purpose client library for Ruma. So we've had one release, I think, so far, or maybe two. So if we go to Ruma Client, docs.rs is a website that will that hosts the documentation for all Rust crates. A crate is what a sort of a package is called in Rust. Anything that has been published to the central Rust crate repository at crates.io will be automatically documented on docs.rs. So if you have a library whose documentation you want to read, you just go to docs.rs/ and then the library name, and it'll load the documentation for the most recent version of Ruma, or of the library you're looking at. So Ruma Client is the sort of high-level client library for connecting to Matrix. And it might actually be more useful to look at a example of this. So in the directory, I'm not sure how up to date this is because we're kind of in the middle of doing some major revamps of how this works and also updating Ruma's code to work with the latest version of the client server Matrix API, which is 050, which is about I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 weeks old. But take a look at this example. If you haven't used Rust before, this will be probably too difficult to understand. But basically what's happening here is we're using the Ruma client library to connect to a Matrix home server and essentially run some commands against it. So we're right here, we're connecting to a home server over HTTPS. We're registering a guest account on the home server. We're getting an alias for something. What are we getting an alias for? I guess we're looking for a particular room. I haven't looked at this in a long time. And then once we have a room, we are joining the room, and then we're sending a hello world message to that room. So this is just an example of how to use Ruma client to build software that interacts with the Matrix protocol. So you could use this for building like a chat bot or an integration with another chat service or really anything you can imagine. Eventually, Ruma client will probably also be used in the home server for talking to other components. So Ruma client itself is built on several other Ruma libraries. So you can see here under the dependencies section, Ruma client itself depends on Ruma API, Ruma client API, and Ruma identifiers. We're trying to separate the sort of like the different aspects of what could be packaged, like functionality in the Matrix protocol that can be packaged as a standalone library, so that people who are building software that integrates Matrix can sort of pick and choose only the parts of the stack that they need and not necessarily like import this giant library if all they need to be able to do is like represent a user identifier or something like that. They don't need all of this stuff. Question is, can this be also helpful to build bots on Telegram? Sort of, not directly. This software library integrates only with the Matrix API. However, it is a goal of Matrix that that Matrix can be bridged to other sorts of chat services. So if we look for Matrix bridging, let's see if I can find types of bridging. So one of the goals of Matrix is, you know, you've probably a lot of the time people talk about that XKCD comic that is talking about competing standards. Let's see, XKCD standards. You've probably seen this before. How standards proliferate. Situation, there are 14 competing standards. 14? Ridiculous. We need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone's use cases. Yeah. Soon. Situation, there are 15 competing standards. So you've probably seen this before in relation to when people try to like create an abstraction over a collection of other things and they don't do a great job of it, or it's kind of a leaky abstraction in some sense, and then the result is that there's really just kind of like yet another variant of the thing that they were trying to generalize over, and it becomes a standard itself and nothing really ever gets better. People bring this up a lot when they first learn about what Matrix is and saying like, oh, they're just trying to pull the standards problem on all of the existing things that already tried to do this. Like, why not just use XMPP? Why not use Telegram? Why not use Slack? Why not use Mattermost? You know, like, use one of these other things that already exists. You're just adding more. So to deal with that, one of the sort of foundational ideas in Matrix is that you should be able to bridge to other existing systems, and as best as can be achieved, this should be sort of transparent. So the idea is that if you use Matrix as sort of your central communication hub for your own chatting, you should also be able to talk to people on other services without them having to switch to the service you're using. So there are bridges that sort of run against different application APIs. Let me see if there. So here I'm looking at the client server API, but there are also multiple APIs that constitute matrix. So there's client server, server server, application service, and this third one, application service, is the one that's intended for things like bridges, which essentially is connecting to matrix and some other chat service at the same time, and kind of facilitating interoperability between the two by, for example, like reading in messages from one side and propagating them into the other service. So there are bridges that have been developed for a lot of the major chat platforms. You can run a bridge that will integrate a matrix room with an IRC channel, or with a Telegram, channel or room, whatever they're called. Or what else? Like certainly Slack is one of them. There's also a relatively popular chat service called Gitter that integrates directly with GitHub projects. So if you have a GitHub project, you can sort of create a chat service specifically to support that, where your users can come and ask you questions. There's a bridge that will link a Gitter room and a matrix room so the two sides can talk to each other. So to answer the question is, you don't use the matrix API to build a bot for another service directly, but if you use a bridge to bridge your matrix home server with one of these other services, then if you build a bot for matrix, it can effectively work against all these other services that it's bridged to. So if you're not using matrix, if you're only ever going to use Telegram, this is probably not what you want. But obviously I would encourage you to check out matrix and give this idea a try. I would also mention specifically that I'm not a big fan of Telegram. I've never registered an account for it because the creators of it have decided that they are going to use their own non-standard protocol for end-to-end encryption, which has not been well received by the security and cryptography communities. And I know a lot of people who work in security who consider Telegram to not be a good choice for secure communications, and consider the creator and sort of people that are running Telegram, the business, to not be people who are acting in good faith in their discussions about the safety of Telegram. So if you're using it, it is what it is, but I would really encourage you to check out some other stuff. Matrix does support end-to-end encryption. It's had a security audit. It's as far as I know, pretty well received by the security and cryptography communities. So it's a much safer bet. And of course, if you're really just talking about I want to talk to one other person in as secure a way as possible, and not leak any metadata, really what you want to be using today is signal.org. This is an app for your phone that is just kind of a pretty straightforward instant messenger. And I think this is probably your safest bet if you have a real sort of concern about security. So use that. Someday Matrix will probably be a good choice as well for security, but also as it currently stands, Matrix records a lot of metadata about communications that Signal doesn't. So for really sort of more secure anonymous communication, this is a better choice. So I was not meaning to attack the person who suggested Telegram by talking about this security stuff. It's just because it came up, and this is a thing that I care about and I'm interested in. So I'm not trying to shame you for using Telegram. By all means, if it does what you need, use it. I just wanted to mention that for anyone who may not realize that it has those properties. No big deal. No hard feelings. Okay, so I hope that sort of explains what these different libraries about. So the original question is, what is Ruma API? Ruma API is a foundational layer that really just exposes this one trait, where a trait in Rust is kind of equivalent to an interface in Java. And it's probably if you're at all familiar with Haskell, it's most similar to a type class. It's kind of the general idea is you're saying that a type can implement this trait, and if it does, then it provides this particular API that you know to exist. So this endpoint represents one of these APIs, And so then we have this other library called Ruma Client API. Where's Ruma Client API? So yeah, Ruma Client uses Ruma Client API, and this is the library that uses the Ruma API macro. What's a good example? Alias. No. Alias up here. So here's an example of the Ruma API macro being used. So Ruma Client API is this other intermediate library that essentially uses the Ruma API macros. This bang right here, the Ruma API with the exclamation point, is invoking a procedural macro. So this is going to generate a whole bunch of sort of procedural code at compile time. And based on this sort of declarative definition of what the API endpoint accepts as input and what it provides as output, it will generate the necessary endpoint data to be plugged into Ruma Client, so we can use just sort of a generic HTTP client to make requests and get responses from these API endpoints. Question, what is Ruma? I think I've already explained that on the stream, so I will just say really briefly, Ruma is an implementation of the matrix communication protocol implemented in the Rust programming language. And I've already talked on this stream and the recording a few times about what Ruma and what matrix are. So please just go to ruma.io and check that out, or start following along with the rest of the stream, and you'll pick up a little bit more detail about what it is. So let's see, where did we leave off? So I was running the tests. I discovered that I am using... Yeah, someone's saying we need a bot for common questions. I've seen that there are like Twitch bots where you can do like exclamation point some term, and then it'll like respond with answer to questions. If this stream starts to get more popular, and like the stuff that I'm working on here is all relatively obscure to the masses, so I'm going to probably get a lot of the same questions. So I think, yeah, that may be a good idea in the future, to have sort of like an FAQ bot that can link people to answers to things that I've answered previously, so that the people who have been watching the stream for longer will not have to listen to me explain the same things over and over. And that's not to discourage people from asking questions, even if they've been answered before. Like, please do. This will actually like help figure out like what are the most common questions, so we can try to create some tooling that'll make this easier. Yeah, exactly. We need a bang, I'm new, tell me all about it. Exactly. So what I was doing here is I'm trying to run the tests for this library, and I actually can't remember what something about the macro not being found. So cargo test will run the tests. It can't find the serialize derive macro. I think what I'm going to do for now is I'm just going to import it into the test. Question from chat: why Rust and not C++ or C? So I mentioned a little earlier when I was talking about what Rust is. Rust is, I like to describe it as what C++ would be today if C++ were to be invented today. So it's kind of like intended for the same use cases. Like, you want to be able to write software that is as performant as possible, that can be used without abstractions that have runtime penalties of performance, that have the ability to run in constrained environments. So you want to be able to use these on you want to be able to write Rust software for anything where C or C++ might have been used. So a microcontroller, like a kernel module, an operating system, or alternatively anything higher level than that. So for example, like matrix consists of JSON being exchanged over HTTP. So this is basically like a web server implementation. And as such, it's a pretty high level use for Rust. But Rust, perhaps somewhat unlike C++, is uses a lot of sort of like things from higher level languages that have proven themselves to be useful over the last, 50 years. And kind of tries to take the best from a lot of different languages and merge them all together into sort of one language that gives you the performance that you would expect from C and C++, but with a lot of these sort of high-level programming idioms that you'd expect from something like a dynamic language or something like Haskell, that gives you sort of very good compile time guarantees about correctness and this memory safety and all those sorts of things. So it's kind of just like a modern iteration on the idea of systems programming. Rust is awesome. I think it's hard to learn for a lot of people, especially if you've been programming for a while, because it makes a lot of sort of different assumptions about how software should be modeled that make it a little bit hard to unlearn practices that you may be used to. So it's kind of commonly referred to as or commonly understood to be a language that is a little bit difficult to learn or that has a high learning curve. But once you do, it's very enjoyable to use, and I found that I'm really happy with sort of the guarantees that I get from the type system and the compile time guarantees about my programs. I came from Ruby. That was the language that I used the most before I started using Rust, and I just like when I use Ruby now, I find it really frustrating because there's so many things that I'm making a lot of mistakes that in Rust would be caught by the compiler, and in Ruby are just not, and they just become runtime errors. And it's really hard to write in that way once you get used to sort of all the sort of correctness guarantees that Rust gives you. Yes, I've heard Elixir referred to as sort of a similar thing about like once you learn Elixir, it's hard to go back to Ruby. Yes, comment. Using Rust means that you have to figure out yourself. With C++ or C, they have a bigger community. That is true. There's a lot more like learning material and like content in general. There's a lot of code to learn from. A lot more people that know C and C++. So yes, it's true that you have like technically a lot more resources at your fingertips. And that can be seen certainly as an advantage. I guess there's somewhat of a disadvantage too, just in that it's a little harder to know where to start and to know what is the most sort of up-to-date and the most useful and the sort of like canonical way to learn some of these languages that have decades of history, a lot of which are using practices that are no longer recommended by people who use them. So with a large community and a long history comes baggage. And so there are sort of pros and cons for it. But I've been having a really good time using Rust. I think it's really suitable for the kinds of stuff that I'm doing. So if you're interested in it, check it out. By no means does it need to replace C or C++ if you're using those in another project. I think if I were to start a brand new project today, and someone was asking me like, should I use C++ or should I use Rust? It kind of depends on like what the domain you're using it for is. I think for certain things, Rust is still very, very immature. Like one example that comes up a lot is for GUI development. There's a website called Are We GUI Yet? I'm guessing .rs? No? Are We GUI Yet? What is the name? Oh, it's just .com. So this is a website that sort of tracks the suitability of Rust for doing GUI programming, and the basic answer for right now is it's not very good. And like there's, as you can see, there's a bunch of projects that are working on this in various ways. Because a cross-platform native GUI library is such a massive undertaking, there hasn't been a very sort of comprehensive pure Rust implementation of this yet. And so a lot of these are like, bindings to GTK, bindings to Qt, stuff like that. So if you're doing GUI development, Rust is not a good choice right now. Hopefully in the future it will be. For certain types of asynchronous networking or asynchronous computations, Rust is not a good choice as of today, but in about 6 weeks it will be, because there's about to be a major release of Rust that stabilizes the async and await keywords for doing asynchronous networking and asynchronous I/O. So Rust is being developed at a very fast pace. There's brand new stable releases of Rust every 6 weeks. it works on sort of like a release train module. Yes, async release in 6 weeks. So give or take. So if we go back to rustlang.org. So currently, the current stable version of Rust is 1.36, which I think came out on the 4th of July, actually. It was about a month ago. So every 6 weeks, a new version of Rust is released to the stable channel, and that release spent the previous 6 weeks under the beta channel, and then the 6 weeks before that, the beta release was generated from the current state of the nightly compiler, and the nightly compiler is just kind of like an ongoing development that is going day to day. So every 6 weeks, the nightly compiler gets frozen in time and promoted to beta. The beta release spends the next 6 weeks release cycle sort of baking and making sure there are no bugs that need to be backported. And then if no bugs are found, at the end of 6 weeks, the beta gets promoted to the next stable. So as of today, August 2nd, there's about 12 days left before the next release cycle happens. And in the next release cycle, the async and await keywords are going to go from nightly Rust only to beta, which means 6 weeks after that, they will finally be in stable Rust. If you want to learn more about asynchronous Rust, then you should visit areweasyncYet.com? No, this one's .rs. Well, they had to make it super confusing. So areweasyncYet.rs is the website that tracks the progress of async IO in Rust, both in terms of the parts of it that are required by the language itself and the standard library, and also parts of the ecosystem that are built on top of it that pretty much everyone uses. So there's a lot to learn about this. If you really want to dig deep into understanding the details of async IO in Rust, what I really, really recommend is look for John Genset async await. Yeah. The what and how of futures and async await in Rust is this 4-hour long video, which I realize is very long, so obviously if you don't have a lot of interest in the details of this is probably more time than you're willing to spend at this point. But this video is by far the best example I've seen of explaining all of how asynchronous computations and asynchronous IO work in Rust, and what all of the sort of moving parts are, what are the language features and the standard libraries that sort of allow us to do this, what's sort of like the model of how it all works. And also he talks about sort of the history of how it's developed and what is coming soon and like the sort of the release plan. So this guy is awesome. If you're interested in learning more about Rust and watching some more Rust live streams, he does streams that are really good that are much more general than what I'm doing. He's done Rust live streaming on a bunch of different topics, whereas I'm doing streaming specifically on my own project, which is Ruma. So check him out. He is John Who on Twitter. Also, if you want to follow him there, JONHOO. That's him. Awesome guy. Mentioned him in the last post, the last stream also, and I imagine it'll come up again. But that's a place you want to go to check out details about Rust and async IO. So let's see. Last question I got in chat is, do you have a CS degree or are you all self-taught? No, I don't have a degree, although I was working on one for a while. My college degree is actually in music, which is pretty far from what I have ever ended up doing professionally. I was working on a CS minor for a while I was in school, although I decided that I actually really didn't enjoy school very much. I've always kind of enjoyed self-directed learning more, and I feel like I was able to do that at a pace that I felt was much more suitable. So I never ended up finishing the CS minor, and I've just been doing programming as a career for about 10 years. So that's sort of my background personally. Man, if I were able to go back in time though, I would totally do a computer science major, because I think the more I understand about programming and the more I understand about computer science, the more I regret not having the sort of academic foundation that a full and completed CS degree would have given me. I realize that obviously you don't need a CS degree to be a programmer. Like I would say that in fact most of the people who work in the tech industry do not have CS degrees. Um, I kind of have mixed feelings about that because it's like I don't think that like college should be a blocker for any particular domain, especially in the US where college is insanely expensive because college essentially becomes sort of a class-based gateway device. It's like, are you rich enough to afford this education? And I don't like the idea of that becoming a blocker for who can and cannot successfully write software. Um, at the same time, I do feel a little bit sad that there are so many people out there that are kind of self-taught and are what I call is sort of a tutorial programmer. And in some domains, I would consider myself a tutorial programmer. It's the kind of person where you're very good at like knowing how to do one specific sort of task that you learn from following a guide or a blog or something like that. But when you're faced with a challenge that is something a little off the path from what you've done before, you haven't necessarily sort of internalized the foundations of what you're doing, and so you don't have the tools necessary to really think about problems in a general way. You're kind of only able to sort of regurgitate patterns that you've seen before. So you can, of course, break away from being a quote unquote tutorial developer to being sort of a more intermediate or experienced developer who can really solve problems in a generic way, just from practice and from time. But I think there is a lot of value in having an academic background and having a little bit of more of a formal understanding of the fundamentals of computer science and programming. I think that those things go a long way in terms of the kind of software that you'll be able to write. Okay, so I think I've answered all the questions that were asked in chat. Let me get back to where I originally was. I'm once again forgetting where that was. Oh, right. So we were looking at compiler errors, and I'm getting this error about the derive macro not being in scope, which is frustrating. Okay, so let's see. Where's the derive macro coming in? Let's take a look at this again. So derive. Okay, so in source lib. Okay, so we're deriving deserialize and serialize in a couple of places in Ruma API macros. So maybe what I want to do here is let's go to request.rs and look for derive. Okay, so here's a place where I'm deriving these. I'm going to try and fully qualify this to see if it'll work. So what I want here is Ruma API exports certi. Let's come on. I want to copy this. Let's put those in there and see if fully qualifying this will keep it from being confused about where those names are coming from. Generally import those derive macros into scope where you're working, but it's a little confusing here because we're trying to refer to everything inside Ruma API. Okay, that seems to be all of them. And then we want to look at response.rs. Another question. What was your first CS-related job? Actually, I've only ever worked professionally as a programmer. I never had a job in music. So my very first job was actually working for the business school at the college that I went, and I was doing like front-end development for them, like HTML, CSS, just maintaining their website, basically. So I've moved from sort of front-end web development to quote-unquote full-stack development to back-end development, and then I've worked in infrastructure. So I've done a lot of stuff across I don't. Yeah, you can most certainly get a job knowing only HTML and CSS. I think it's probably harder nowadays since so much of front end development is done via like taking higher level languages and toolkits and sort of compiling them down to like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. But at the time that I started, like more than 10 years ago, most certainly there were like a zillion jobs where there was just a strong need for people to sort of bang out a lot of like marketing websites and just really sort of things that require only the fundamentals of HTML and CSS. I think those jobs probably still exist, but are maybe fewer and farther between now. So I guess I'm lucky that I started when I did, that I could kind of evolve with things. All right, let's try running this again. See, oh, did I remember to save? I don't remember if I saved that. Let me try that again. Ah, excellent. So that got rid of the errors about not being able to find the derive macros, serialize and deserialize. So the last problems we have here: undeclared use of module endpoint. Type request is not a member of trait. Cannot find endpoint in this scope. So that sounds like, let's see, mod. Okay, well, I've definitely implemented in endpoint. Where else is endpoint used? So here I actually want to do Ruma API endpoint. And is it mentioned anywhere else? Yeah. Okay, and then the other thing we want to do, so that should fix one of these errors. Yep, that got rid of two of them. And so then the last problem should be that we are only implementing endpoint for this endpoint struct that no longer exists. Whereas we want it to actually be on the request now. So how's that going to work? So what endpoint actually requires, if we look at the docs, is just that const metadata. So where's the implementation of endpoint? Aha. So there's no longer a type called endpoint. What we're actually doing here is we're implementing this for request, and there's no longer an associated type called request. So that actually may be all we need. Let's try cargo test again. Typo annotations needed. Cannot resolve underscore as Ruma API endpoint response. Interesting. Where does that come into play? I think I may need cargo expand for this, because I'm not sure. This is probably happening in one of the try from implementations. Let me search for try from. From request for response. From request for response. Yeah, what is the complaint here? I'm not sure where that error is initiating, so maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to try cargo expand again. Let's do cargo. Yep. Let's expand the generated macro code to temp output. And then let's just make a new tab and we'll go into temp. And if I do rustc output.rs, oh, this isn't going to work because I have all of these. Ah, God, this is so annoying. Right. Well, let's take a look at the output. So this is kind of cool because what you're seeing here is the code that is generated by the macro. And that's what cargo expand gives us. I don't know if this... the frustrating thing is that like I can't easily compile this to get an error message based on where this stuff is. So it doesn't really... doesn't really narrow down where that error is coming from. Cannot resolve endpoint response. Maybe what I'll do is just make a new cargo project. And let's see, let me do make dir our cargo new lib foo, and then we're going to move output to foo source lib.rs, and then let's move into foo, and I'm probably going to have to remove some of this stuff. Let's get rid of these things, and then let me open up cargo.toml, and we're going to create a dependency on Ruma API, and this is at a path which is code Ruma API. Failed to load source for dependency. Oh, it doesn't know how to resolve squiggle. So this is at users Jimmy. Let's try that again. Alright, I'm just going to let that run. That will hopefully help me figure out where that error is coming from. So it's some place where the responses type is being used. Type response. That's the only place where that's being used. So I don't know why. Oh, maybe it's. Let's see. Where are we constructing a response? This really shouldn't be a problem, because we're always referring to the response as that concrete type. So yeah, I'm really not sure where this is coming from. Ah, God, this is a drag. This crate is being loaded from the sys root, an unstable location. What on earth does that mean? Oh. Okay, let me go to temp foo. Temp foo. Where are we here? Oh yeah, from source lib. So we're not using Ruma API. We can probably get rid of that. What else was it complaining about? Unused import endpoint. Try into is not being used. Test is not being used. Oh yeah, let's get rid of this. We don't need test. Oh, automatically derived. That's where... Ah, someone's saying, I got a Rust problem, could I ask it to you? Yeah, sure. By all means. So let's find every instance of automatically derived and get rid of this, because we want to pretend that we have done those ourselves. What is it complaining about here? I don't understand this. Oh my god, hold on. Let me clear my output and just go all the way up to the top. Oh, what the hell? So we still have a double colon HTTP somewhere. Well, that seems like a problem. So it was .get double colon HTTP? Where's that coming from? Let's see, .get It doesn't like that. Dot get content type headers. So this is in try from request. Which request is this? Try from HTTP request for request. That's this guy. Okay, so the one it's complaining about is right here. Oh, these two are both wrong. Content type headers. Oops. So this comes from parse request headers. Let's see, parse request headers. Has header fields. Oh, yeah. So this whole time I've only been updating these references to things in mod.rs, but some of this stuff gets generated in other Rust modules. So I have totally neglected to update all of those references in these other modules. So if we look at source API request, I guess, we need to also look for double colons here. Sure enough. We still have references to like HTTP without this. So let me get all of these, and we're going to type it correctly this time. So this is Ruma API exports HTTP. So no quadruple colons. Question is, I'm trying to use TLS, but since it's not splittable, how would I read and write from it at the same time? Yeah. I don't know that I'm going to be able to answer that without looking at some example code. I'd like to share this connection at different places too. Yeah, I don't think that's the right kind of question for me to address on the stream because it's not really... It's a little more involved than just talking about something conceptually, and it's not part of what I'm working on. So, yeah, maybe someone in chat can help you. Otherwise, ask the question on the Rust subreddit, because it's really, really helpful. old.reddit.com/rust. These folks are super, super helpful. Just post an example of the code you're using. You can also use the Rust Playground. Let's see if there's a link to it here. Yeah. Rust Playground is play.rustlang.org. And this will let you like paste in your code and let people be able to run this. Also, Stack Overflow is actually quite good for Rust questions. If you go to Stack Overflow, and whoa, it's been a long time since I've seen the logged out state of Stack Overflow. Search for Rust. Yeah. So there's, oh, it's funny he actually did, oh yeah, so this guy, Shepmaster, whose real name is Jake Goulding. So this guy is an absolute madman of answering questions related to Rust. Like basically every question on Stack Overflow related to Rust, this guy has either answered or edited and cleaned up. And he's super, super helpful. Apparently spends a lot of time helping people on Stack Overflow. So you may actually find the answer to your question already on here and most likely answered by him. But if not, like it'll get answered pretty fast. Like Rust is getting pretty good at documentation. There's another question. Why are you implementing the matrix protocol? Do you have a further goal in mind, like creating some kind of software that relies on it? Actually, I can't quite remember my very first motivations for doing it, but basically it came down to when I first learned about what matrix was, the only, and still to this day really, the only feature complete home server is Synapse, which is developed by the same people that created the matrix specification, and also the same people who created Riot, which is the sort of premier chat client that you can use for Rust, or for Matrix. So you can see it looks more or less like Slack or any of those other similar chatting programs that you're used to, except that it works by connecting to the Matrix network. So if you want to run your own home server, really the only realistic choice for it right now is Synapse, which is written in Python, and it doesn't have very great performance characteristics. So there's a lot of people that like want to try to install it on like a Raspberry Pi or something, and it really uses a lot of resources. So part of the motivation was that I do want to run my own home server at some point, but I didn't really want to manage like the sort of operations of like a Python-based home server. So part of it was that just Rust seemed like a really suitable language for implementing a home server that would be more performant, and because of like the sort of the type system and all of the guarantees that you get it via ahead of time compilation would be I think much safer and much less prone to bugs than Synapse, which is written in Python. So this is fully functional. I mean, this is what the matrix.org public home server runs on, and a lot of people run their own Matrix home servers using Synapse. So it's perfectly usable. So it was partly of just kind of like thinking that we needed to have some additional choices in home servers. Part of it is like that specific use case. The other part of it is that I really like Matrix, and I think what they're doing is really important and really useful for the world right now. I think it's kind of a hot topic to have this kind of open federated system for communication, and I really want to see them succeed. And I think the way that that's going to happen is by making sure that that interoperation is not just a theoretical thing, but actually something that has been proven with software that has been built. So part of the motivation for Ruma as a project was to sort of prove out the suitability of the matrix specification and say, if Synapse were to disappear today, can you actually use the spec to build a real interoperable Matrix home server? And if not, let's give feedback to the Matrix organization to improve the spec to actually get it to a place where that's possible. And to a certain extent, that's also true of Rust. Like, Rust is also a pretty new programming language. Certainly in the history of programming languages, the ecosystem is fairly immature compared to much more established languages. And so Ruma is kind of like at this really interesting intersection of these two relatively new technologies that only kind of came into the public's eye at about the same time, around 2014, 2015. So Ruma is kind of working as a similar role in both of these communities, like trying to be a forcing function for both Rust and the Matrix protocol to see how suitable they really are for building something real and kind of work out the kinks. And also, I just really like Rust, and I really like doing open source development, so I was looking for a new project to do in Rust, and this was something that I cared about enough that I thought it was worthy of spending my time on. So that's probably the somewhat long-form answer to the question of why I'm building this. Hope that answered your question. Let me make sure I added... let's see, did I add Synapse to... Yeah, I guess you could say it's a for fun project. Like, I'm not intending... I mean, I do have... recently, we did start accepting donations for the project, so there is, like, some very, very, very minor financial motivation, but, like, it's not something that's ever going to be able to be my job. Like, I'm not going to be able to live off money made from this. So that's not really my motivation for this. It really is just, like, sort of my passion project, I guess. And there's been plenty of people that have expressed their interest in it. If you want to join us, like on, if you go to Ruma.io, there's a link down at the bottom that says Matrix Room. You can come chat on the Matrix channel on the matrix.org public home server, and there's several hundreds of other people that are interested in this project and that have been contributing to it. I'm really grateful for all of them for both their interest and code contributions and discussion that is helping me to design the system better. Okay, let's get back to trying to fix this stuff. So I think I've got... oh, no, we've got one here. Serde JSON needs to be referenced. Also,
Oh, that's the only one. Ruma API, exports, Serde JSON. I think that's it for references to other crates in this module. Yes, no? Looks like it. Yep. Okay, so let's look at also response and make sure we've got the same thing. Anything here that references... Yep. There's HTTP. So this needs to also be Ruma API exports HTTP. And that's the one that I think it was complaining about. Anything else here? That looks like everything. Okay, so that should... Maybe that's enough. Let's try testing again. Is that all it was? Nope, still got the same problem. That's frustrating. Okay, let's expand again. And oh, I should really have put that in temp. What did I call it? Foo? Oh, what the hell? What did I just do? Where did I put this? Temp foo. Oops. Temp foo source lib.rs. Okay. Did I put some junk here? Let's... Yeah, let's remove FO. We don't need that. And let's also remove output. Okay. So we'll get you to get rid of this stuff again. And we'll get rid of automatically derived. Get rid of all of these. And let's try running that again. Let's cargo check this. Let's see what sort of things it complains about. Aha! Now, what is this nonsense about? Declaration of non-standard main function. Yes, forgot to delete that again. Unused imports. Unstable library feature test. Extern crate. Where's that appearing? Extern crate. Oh dear. That's annoying. Let's do... Wait, what is it? Is that actually a... Use of unstable library feature rustc private. Why in the world is that complaining about rustc? Oh, maybe it's because of these lints? Let's try that. Let's see. Allow unknown lints. I wonder if it's these two that it's complaining about? I'm not sure. Let's try that. No, it still doesn't like that. Where's this rustc private stuff coming from? Yeah, this is really frustrating. Like, debugging procedural macros is not very fun. I don't know why it's crapping itself on this. What if I just try use Ruma API exports Serde as underscore Serde? Will that be enough to make it stop? Is there another extern crate here somewhere? Yeah, sure enough. So let's do this and get rid of all of these. Get rid of all of these generated things in case this is what it's complaining about. It's hard to know because, like, again, it's like the... I don't want it to generate... I don't ideally want it to generate everything, just the my macro expansion. Aha! There we go. That was all it took. So line 820. So it's in the try from implementation from... Oh, I see. It's because I'm referring to the trait here instead of the endpoint, because this is leftover code from before when there actually was a struct called endpoint. This needs to be changed to be called request now. So what I'm looking for is probably back in mod.rs endpoint : metadata. Yeah, this needs to be request metadata. And that may be enough to get this to pass. No, it still didn't like that. Sorry about the noise outside. Some guy's revving his motorcycle. Let me close the window. 1 second. Motorcycles, bane of my existence. What an asshole. Okay, so it didn't like that. It didn't... Oh, wait a minute, because this is not referring to the... This is referring to the local request, not a request type. Let's try that. Come on. Oh, so close. So... Ruma API... Oh, well, does Ruma API macros still have a test? Hold on, what else? Ruma API macros... That doesn't have a test anymore. Where's that test coming from? Let's see. So... Ruma API tests passed. Ruma API macros test passed. What's the difference here? I'm not sure why there's two different ones here. Doc test... Oh. Regular test passed. Both doc tests passed. Oh, doc test in Ruma API macros. Huh. This might be a problem. Oh, I guess I can get rid of this now, because I'll leave it open just in case we need it for some other reason. Wow, that was a long way to go just to find this one line. That was a pretty obvious mistake, but I'm just an idiot. But I guess that's kind of useful, because people get to see a little bit of an example about how to do some debugging of procedural macros. Not the prettiest thing in the world. Okay, so the thing it was complaining about is the doc test for... Hold on, let me quit all this. Oh yeah, source lib could not find exports in Ruma API. Why is that? Where's the doc? Oh, wait a minute. Doc test? Huh? Source lib 148. What in the world? Oh, and this is Ruma API macros 148. So that's the other crate. 148. Yeah, so it didn't like this. Oh, and I can get rid of this now. Or I should be able to. Could not find exports in Ruma API. Maybe I don't actually want to... Oh, I do have it set as no run. And this is still the same thing. Oh, let's get rid of this one too. This is still the same thing. Ah. I'm not really sure why it's complaining about this. Why can't it find... I guess it's because it's kind of this like circular dependency problem. Because Ruma API macros only gets loaded by Ruma API. When it's being re-exported. This is unfortunate. Well, I'm already testing this stuff. Let me see. Let me make sure. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open the tests file. So let's look at tests. I'm going to make sure that all these tests are represented over here. So we've got the sum endpoint. I think this is all the same. Yep. That looks right. And then we've got a new type body endpoint. So what I'm going to do is just copy this into the test so that we know it's running. It's kind of a hacky way to do this. What is it complaining about here? This is 30. I really like the doc tests to compile, but I think because of this circular dependency sort of problem, it probably won't. Let's see, can I do ignore? Will that do it? As long as I'm testing that use case, I'm happy. Let's see what this does. Okay, that's not ideal, but I think maybe I'll come up with a way to do it later. Let's see, have I ever committed this? Oh yeah. Wait, what was that? So what have I actually changed here? Yeah. Okay, I think ultimately that's all we want. It's not that much code in the end that was changed. There's just a lot of little details, and you know, debugging procedural macros is always tough. I think that makes it take a little longer than I would like. So I've been streaming for almost 3 hours, so this is probably a good time to stop. Let me just commit what I've done here, and say merge. Oh no, re-export Ruma API macros from Ruma API. Okay, I think I'm pretty happy with that, so let me push that up. And, oh, I probably should have, that was dumb. I should have run cargo format and cargo clippy and all that nonsense, because I think, let's see, cat Travis. Yeah, so I want to run cargo audit, otherwise this is all just going to fail. Cargo format, all. Oh, okay, good. Cargo clippy, all targets, all features. Let's make sure that this does not give me any warnings. Oh, okay. So I lucked out. I didn't actually have any mistakes, so it was fine to have pushed that up. Okay, so if you want to go look at the work that I just did, it is up on GitHub now. It's github/Ruma/Ruma API, and it's now up on master. There's that commit that I just pushed. So I'll probably get ready to release a new version of this crate so that we can start building the new Ruma client API on this new revision. I'm not going to do that on stream because it's kind of not that interesting to watch, and I still want to go back and fix up all of these Git tags that now need to be renamed. So I think we are done for today. On the next stream, I'm probably going to be working on Ruma events, because there's a problem that we discovered with the API that I recently released in Ruma events, which is Ruma events is another one of the Ruma libraries that contains all of the sort of data types used by Matrix. So in Matrix, all of the data that's recorded, like messages and room joining and leaving, and all of the things that happen are represented as events. And these data structures are all defined in this single library called Ruma events, so that they can be shared by the client and the server parts of the project. And these can all serialize and deserialize to JSON. And we recently released a new revision of this API that hides the implementation of deserialization. So it used to be that you could take a type like a message event, and you could deserialize this directly from JSON. But it turns out that there are certain cases where our Rust representation of the type is actually a little more strict than what we might receive as a JSON event over federation in when the matrix service is actually operating. And so we need a way to represent like an invalid event when deserializing. So we actually removed the public deserialization interface, and what you do instead is you have this from string implementation. So you basically just pass in a string of JSON data, and it'll give you back either a deserialized and validated event or an error, which is this invalid event type. But the problem with that is that when you're deserializing a larger data structure, like in something like Ruma Client API, when you actually get to working with the API, then you have stuff like this where, I guess that's not a good example because it doesn't have an event in it. Let me look at, I don't know, something like sync. So sync events, somewhere in here we're going to have like, yeah, some state events or something. You have to be able to deserialize the larger structure, and the way deserialize works is it's just sort of delegating to deserialize implementations of its containing types. So if we look at like response here, room. So the top level thing is like a JSON object that has these three fields, and then in rooms, it has this stuff, and then let's see what like here's a joined room, timeline, and then we have a vec of room events. Like this stuff can't be deserialized because it no longer has a public implementation of deserialize. So basically we need to figure out a way to get around that problem, and that is probably going to be the focus of my next stream, which will be sometime next week, I'm guessing. I probably won't stream over the weekend. So that's what you have to look forward to, and I have a much less clear idea of how I'm going to solve that than what I was doing on this stream. So I'll get a chance to really embarrass myself by not knowing what the hell I'm doing. But hopefully some of you smart people who are watching and following along in the chat will be able to help me along and see where I'm making obvious mistakes. Anyway, I'm going to end it here today. Thank you very much for everyone who watched. Thanks again to Twitch user Sika Player for rating and bringing in all those new interested parties. I hope some of you are become interested in either Matrix or Rust or both from this initial introduction, and if not, I hope it was at least amusing for an hour or two on this Friday afternoon. So thanks everyone. If you want to go back and watch this later, it's going to be on YouTube. I think I showed my YouTube channel earlier. Unfortunately I don't have a nice username for this channel yet, so I don't have an easy way to link to it. But this is what my logo looks like. You can just search for my name, Jimmy Quadra, or you can follow me on Twitter, which I also have the same username, twitter.com/Jimmy Quadra. You can find me here, and I will also tweet a link to the recording of this video, and I'll probably be in the habit of doing that after each stream that I finish. So you'll be able to find it there. If you find that you have questions later, you can leave me a comment on YouTube, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. So thanks again, and I'll see everyone in the next stream. Have a good weekend.